The insult landed like a stone in still water, sharp enough to slice the silence of the hall and heavy enough to ripple through the gathered officers. A junior lieutenant sneered across the table, his voice cutting the air with careless arrogance. "Why is the aide standing here anyway? Let the real men speak." A faint laugh followed from a corner, brittle, the kind of laughter that thrives only in the shadows of disrespect. The aide did not flinch. He stood at attention, shoulders squared, eyes fixed somewhere just beyond the walls, as if he could see through the steel and concrete into the open horizon he had once crossed under fire. His silence unsettled them more than words could. They mistook his stillness for submission, his plain uniform for insignificance. None of them knew that the story written in the lines of his face was one they could neither match nor comprehend. The room reeked faintly of polish and sweat, the acrid tang of coffee left too long in urns, the sterile sting of bureaucracy pressed into the walls. He stood in the center of it, a living contradiction, invisible, yet impossible to erase. His name was John Hale. They saw only an aide, but what stood before them was a man forged by years in places where silence was survival and patience was power. John carried himself with a stillness that unsettled the restless. His broad shoulders bore no insignia that hinted at the weight he once carried. His hands, calm and steady, had once gripped ropes lowering brothers into darkness, had steadied rifles in storms of sand and smoke. His eyes, quiet but unyielding, had once watched horizons burn red with dawns that some never lived to see. Years earlier, his world had been drenched in salt water and sweat, the taste of iron heavy on his tongue. The Navy had molded him, but the SEALs had carved him into something far sharper. He had spent endless nights in black waters where the only sound was the pounding of his heart and the whisper of the current. He had carried the weight of men too wounded to walk, dragged them through fire when his lungs screamed for air, and buried too many under flags that folded crisp and final. He had not asked for medals, though they had come. He had not asked for recognition, though whispers of his missions floated like ghost stories among those who dared to listen. He had chosen silence, the quiet return to shore, fading into anonymity, carrying with him the faces of those who never returned. To the world, he had become an aide, a nameless shadow behind those with rank. To himself, he had become a guardian of memory, bound by a loyalty that outlived battle. Now, in this polished hall of order and protocol, that silence was mistaken for weakness. The officers talked over him as if he were furniture. Their words grazed him like dull blades, but John knew blades. He had been cut before. He knew what real wounds felt like. As the meeting dragged, the disdain sharpened. A colonel glanced his way and smirked. "Aide, get us more water. That's what you're here for, isn't it?" The laughter was soft, complicit. No one challenged it. No one defended him. The room's silence was not honor, it was cowardice. John moved without protest, not because he was beneath the task, but because he understood something they didn't. Dignity is not lost in service. He returned with the water, placed it gently before the men, and resumed his stance. His quiet endurance pricked at their egos like needles they could not pull out. But a shift was coming. He felt it in the way the door opened moments later, in the sudden stiffening of posture among those who had moments ago been relaxed in their arrogance. The air seemed to constrict as the Admiral entered, an older man, hardened by decades, his chest a map of ribbons, his stare sharp as the sea. The officers rose, but their eyes flicked nervously toward John. The Admiral's gaze found him instantly. And then, with the slowness of ritual, the Admiral lifted his hand, fingers slicing the air in perfect salute, not to the room, not to the ranking officers, but to John Hale, the aide they had just belittled. The silence cracked open. Chairs creaked, breaths caught, and eyes widened with disbelief. No one spoke. No one dared. John did not move immediately. He allowed the weight of the moment to hang, the quiet truth unraveling in front of them. This was not an aide being acknowledged. This was a warrior being honored. John's hand rose at last, steady, deliberate, a mirror of the salute. The Admiral's eyes glimmered with something few had ever seen, reverence. And then the words came, simple, unshakable, etched into the marrow of everyone present. "Gentlemen, you salute a man before whom I stand humbled. Remember his silence speaks louder than your titles." The officers shifted in their seats, the arrogance bleeding out of them, replaced by shame that burned hot in their throats. The colonel who had demanded water lowered his gaze, his earlier words now ash in his mouth. The lieutenant who had laughed felt the sting of his own smallness, realizing the folly of mocking a man whose courage dwarfed his rank. John did not smile. He did not need to. His silence was enough. His life was a quote carved in action, not words, that true power requires no declaration, only presence. In that hall, something shifted beyond the chain of command. Respect was restored, not by orders, but by the undeniable gravity of a man who had given everything and asked for nothing. Later, when the meeting dissolved and the officers filed out, a few paused before John, their salutes hesitant at first, then firmer, their eyes unable to meet his but filled with something like apology. He returned each with the same calm nod, neither condemning nor excusing, simply acknowledging. The Admiral lingered last. He rested a hand briefly on John's shoulder, a weightless gesture heavy with meaning, then left without another word. In the quiet that followed, John remained where he was, still steady, as though rooted to the ground. His silence was his armor, his shield, his final weapon. For in that silence, all could hear the truth: sacrifice does not need to shout to be eternal. And somewhere, deep in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, his presence planted a seed. Days, months, years later, they would remember that moment. The aide who wasn't just an aide, the man saluted first by the Admiral, the living reminder that respect is not granted by title but earned in blood, sweat, and unspoken loyalty. It is in silence that heroes reveal themselves. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one the world should be standing for. So to all who listen, let this story linger as it did in that hall. Let it remind us that dignity is not loud, that sacrifice leaves invisible scars, and that some battles continue long after the war is over. Share where you're listening from, tell the world what respect means to you, and subscribe for more stories that honor the silent heroes among us. For one day, you may find yourself in a room where a quiet man stands, overlooked and underestimated. And you will remember, when the Admiral saluted him first.